On the day she was laid to rest, he walked down the aisle with the woman who betrayed her. But what they didn't know was she wasn't gone for good. She was watching, and she was waiting. Do you believe in karma? Drop a comment below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to timeless audio novel stories for more spine-chilling tales of love, betrayal, and revenge. Faustina smiled at her phone as she read the message from James. I wish I could see your bright smile right now. It would make my life 1,000,000 times better. She grinned widely, letting out a little chuckle. She was going to fulfill his wish in a matter of minutes. They haven't seen each other for a week, and that's the longest Faustina could stay without seeing him. He meant everything to her, a safe place she could always run to, the only person she could rely on. She glanced at the bouquet and wristwatch she bought in a shop on her way home. He had always said men deserved flowers too, and damn, he was right. Her smile widened when she realized the car had brought her to her destination, Alonso Tech, the biggest tech company in America. James had been working there for 2 years now as a code manager. They have been together since he got in, and all she is waiting for is for him to propose. She got down and called Susan a couple of times, but she didn't pick up. She was going to gist her best friend about everything she had planned. Then she would call Stella, her sister, and repeat the same cycle. Faustina shrugged and dropped her phone in her bag. She sighed with a bright smile and headed towards the company. She was some feet away when James stepped out with his arm bag in one hand and a lady's hand in the other. She squinted, just to be sure she wasn't seeing things. She wasn't. James is holding another woman tight, smiling happier than she has seen him in weeks. Her body weakened, and the bag in her hand fell to the ground. All alone, she watched him watch her like she was the only thing he had ever seen. He didn't notice her, but she wished he did. She wanted to walk down there to go meet him and slap his face with the bouquet she bought for him. She has saved up for 3 weeks to get those flowered. She bent down and picked up the bag. Her eyes were filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She watched James get into his car with the lady till they drove off. She still stood there, numb, heartbroken, and barely breathing. The pain tinged with a bee. She took heavy breaths to muffle her sobs. She turned around and went back home. Her family home. Faustina only went home when she needed to clear her head, and when she did, her sister didn't question her. This time is different. What's wrong? Stella asked. She always cared about Faustina, but any time she asked Faustina if she was fine, Faustina always replied with a grin and went into her room. Since their parents died, they have been all alone. Faustina sat in the sitting room. The last time she sat there was with her parents 12 years ago. When Stella saw her, she knew it was more serious than her other breakdowns. Stella joined her on the couch and pulled her closer into an embrace. Faustina has been silent. Even her breath couldn't be heard. She was doing everything to stop her cries from escaping her lips. But she was home, the only place she could do as she liked. Once she was in Stella's embrace, she let out a loud cry and held on to her sister, pouring her eyes out through her eyes and nose. Stella did what she did best. She comforted her sister and eventually cried with her when she couldn't take it anymore. The two sisters stopped crying and exchanged glances. A glance made them both laugh at the same time, which was awkwardly comforting. Faustina told Stella what happened, and Stella was a sharp lady. She flared up and told Faustina to leave him immediately. He doesn't deserve you, she has said. Faustina was indifferent. She decided that she was going to go ask him why he did it, because she still loved him. For 3 days, Faustina didn't talk to James, but to make matters worse, he never texted her. She kept checking her phone every minute. She grabbed her phone at the sound of every notification, hoping it would be his message, but none ever came. 3 days was enough to test her patience. Faustina went to his home, hoping to confront him and get a logical explanation. An excuse for the reason he was with Susan the other day. She stood by the door and sighed heavily. She could hear chuckles and laughter from his house. She swallowed hard and rang the doorbell. It took a few minutes before the door swung open. James wasn't smiling, and he was a little bit sweaty. He stood by the door, covering the inner view with his body. I didn't know you were coming here today, Tina. What's wrong? His voice irritated her. What's wrong? He hadn't spoken to her in 3 days, and he stood there asking her what was wrong. She took a deep breath and steadied herself. James, we haven't spoken in 3 days. I was expecting you to call too. Let me in. Her voice was sharper than she intended. I don't think that's a good idea. Everywhere is messed up, Tina. Can we meet some other time? Her heart was stuck in her throat, making it hard for her to breathe. She could feel the heat on her face, the hate that burned in her heart, and the fear of what she already knew. But she could be wrong. She needed to see it for herself. She needed to make sure all her thoughts were correct. I won't take time, James. Besides, I'm your girlfriend. I don't mind. She pushed him and made her way inside. It was indeed messy, but something else was off. She could smell a woman in the house. A lush perfume that could only belong to a woman. She helped herself to the kitchen while James kept following her everywhere like he was her guard or something. She glanced around the house until she saw it. A female shoe lying recklessly in the sitting room. She looked away before James could figure her out. She sat on the couch and sipped from the bottle of water she got from the fridge. This was always a safe place for her, but somehow she felt like an outsider. You know what? I think I have a place to be in 5 minutes. You should get going, Tina. I'll reach out to you, and we can go out on the ice cream date you always wanted. Faustina forced a smile. I'll wait while you get ready. No. He half yelled and paused to see how loud he was. I mean, you know you were going to delay me. Come on, babe. Faustina took a deep breath before standing up with her bag and dropping the bottle on the table. Well, you must call me. I miss you. He didn't say anything. He only waited for her to leave. She could almost hear the sigh of relief he let out when she finally left. Her chest twisted like a knot. Those shoes, Susan got the exact type last holiday when they both went shopping in LA. She walked away, far enough to make them think she had gone home. But would she go home? She stood in the middle of the walkway and thought about it one last time. She could just go home knowing that this betrayal didn't just exist in books or movies, it was happening to her. She wasn't sure, though. She didn't see Susan. It could have been a shoe he bought for her. She could have been hearing things when she heard a female voice. In 2 strides, she was back on her way to James' house, but this time, she used the back door. He had a habit of leaving it open, making it easier for her to get in. She was as light as a feather on the ground. The moment she went in, she heard the chuckles of a woman and a man. You shouldn't have allowed her into the house, baby. What if she saw me or caught us or something? Faustina covered her mouth to stop herself from freaking out. She knew for sure now that it was Susan. They were in the sitting room while she bent down in the kitchen and watched them, half naked on the couch, hands touching each other, breaths as close as they could get. He was never this intimate with her. My bad, babe. I didn't want her to think there was someone else here. James tucked a hair behind her ear and kissed her. Watching them felt like hot iron was melting against her skin. Tears rolled down her smooth cheeks. You should get rid of her so we can get married, Susan said. James sighed heavily. I need to process this well. I need her papers on the land fee her father left behind. Once I have that, I will dump her ass and we are going to get married. Then I'll finally have my promotion. Phew. This feels effing good. Faustina couldn't take any more. What the heck is wrong with you? She screamed at the top of her voice. Tears pooled her eyes. Susan. Why? She choked on her sob and then regained herself. Why did you do this to me? Whether it was the greatest mistake of her life, Faustina didn't give a heck. She pounced on Susan and gave her a huge slam that sent her back to the couch after she stood up. They were both dumbfounded, and they hadn't expected her to return. Tina, stop. What are you doing? James tried to take her away from Susan, but she pushed him away and dragged the little piece of bralette she had on. It cut loose and her breast jiggled down. Faustina didn't stop. She pulled Susan's hair, fighting her with all the strength she had. Susan tried to fight back, but she wasn't as strong as Tina. You should have remained curious, you piece of shit. Susan yelled, holding her hair to stop Faustina from pulling harder. You were always nothing, and you always will be. You won't have your mouth to say that again when I'm done with you. Once Susan was free, she grabbed the flower vase from the table to scare Faustina off. Faustina did back away a little, but James thought she was about to throw a huge fight again, so he pushed her hard. Susan saw Faustina coming at her with full force and then slammed the vase on her head. Faustina fell to the ground, hitting her head on the center table before landing on the ground. What the EFF? James exclaimed. Why did you do that? I didn't know. She was going to hit me, and I didn't know when it happened. Faustina wasn't responding or moving. In a matter of minutes, she was bleeding out at a high speed, already asleep in a pool of blood. She's dead, Susan. Susan got scared and then later bent down to confirm her fear. What do we do? We just killed a person. Susan was shaking as the blood kept pooling bigger and bigger. Just then, Faustina's phone rang from her bag. Stella was calling. Susan trembled, and tears fell from her eyes. We are never going to get the land now, James. What do we do? I can't go to jail and still not have her land. James held her in place. Don't be frightened. This is good. I'll take care of it, okay? We aren't going to jail. Hold on. I have a gun. Susan wondered what he wanted to do with a gun when Faustina was already dead. Then he brought the gun and placed it on Faustina's head. Wait. Susan yelled. Why do you want to blow her brains out? She is already dead. Don't get this more complicated. People would hear the gunshot, and we would have to question things, and the license would be traced back to your gun. We can make this look like she was robbed while she came to visit you, and you came in just in time. The thieves ran away, and it was too late to save her. We could come up with anything. She made sense to James. So James sent her home after promising he was going to handle the situation. When she was gone, he looked down at the dead body of his girlfriend. You shouldn't have come back, Tina. You should have gone back home like you always do. You should have been the good, curious hole you have always been. He shook his head, called her sister, and faked a panic. He lied to her that he found her in his house, dead. He said she must have slipped and hit her head on the center table. Quickly, he asked to rush to his house. The center table was made of glass, so he tidied up the broken vase and broke the center table instead, so it would look like she fell on it and died. He tried pulling her close to it, but her blood was sticky. So he left her there till Stella came. Stella had asked him why he didn't take her to the hospital. She freaked out when she realized her sister was dead just when she got to the hospital. They told her that she had been dead for a while before she was brought into custody. With no parents and no other family, Stella was forced to turn to their uncle, Liam, who was the only one she had left. Everything was strange about Faustina's death. She knew her sister was sulking over James and another woman. Also, when she got to James's house, it would have been impossible for someone to slip on a rug, and there was no sign of water or anything that could make anyone fall that way. Faustina was gone already. There was nothing she could do about that. Stella mourned her sister every day and found comfort in her uncle. She moved to his house and was forced to be friends with her cousins. Every day, she carried a heavy heart knowing that her sister was lying in the fridge till she would be buried. Faustina had been everything to Stella. She had been her mother, father, and sister at the same time. Times flew, and Stella could never see herself burying her sister. Of course, Susan was with Stella the next day she heard the news. She has cried with Stella like she was going to cry to death. Stella felt it would be harder for someone who was more like a sister to Faustina. Faustina was closer to Susan than anyone else. They had been friends since elementary school. Susan visited Stella every day till her days became weeks and months. 3 months drove by and Stella was finally prepared to bury Faustina. She was going to see her face one last time before she was placed in her coffin and laid to rest. James, however, never came for a visit. He never said anything to Stella since the day Faustina died, which confirmed that he has indeed found another woman. Just 3 months after Faustina's demise, Stella got the wedding invitation to James's wedding. Funny how it landed on the same day she had chosen to bury Faustina. The invitation came in a note that was written in her sister's handwriting. Let's do this jokingly, okay? Who knows? I may die anytime. Stella, mother did this too before she died, and she didn't know she was going to die. I'll say you should do yours too. JK. But if you ever get to read this, I may actually be dead. I hope I have kids now. I want you to know I'm good and I really love you. Also, tell my husband, James, to take care of Susan and the kids. Tell him I want them to always be together and give him the papers to father's land that I own. If you have kids now, say hi to them. I love you. As she read the letter, she fell into tears. She read the invitation and saw that James was getting married to Susan in order to fulfill Faustina's wishes. But how did he come by the letter? She read through it again, and it was indeed her handwriting. Something didn't sit right. Why would Faustina want to give their father's land to James? Everything was revolving around Stella's head, but again, her sister was dead. The best thing she could do was to respect her sister's decisions and to move on. She went to see Faustina one last time before she was placed in the coffin. Everyone was there, and they saw how pretty Faustina looked, even after death. James had come early with Susan to pay their last respects before they went back to have their wedding. Stella felt insulted and declared that she didn't want anyone to be around when they were burying her sister. So, they all left to the waiting room, while Stella alone watched as her sister's body slowly dropped 6 feet under the ground, a situation she never believed she could ever be in. After that day, the memories she had with her sister kept playing in her mind, drawing tears from her face, and keeping her up at night staring at the ceiling. The more she remembered her sister, The more she thought something was wrong with everything that happened over the last 4 months, but she knew she would eventually push through it all. James, however, was now with his new bride, a plan that took him 2 years to build with Susan. His promotion was now valid, and in a week, he would be the new managing director of the company he works at, Alonso Tech. It has always been his dream, and finally, it was happening with the one woman he loved by his side. He had the papers to Faustina's father's land, and everything was going exactly according to plan. But sometimes, he saw Faustina sleeping beside him and playing with his nose. He saw Faustina every night, telling him good night and kissing his cheeks. Every night, he could smell her and feel her close to him. He could see the love she had for him, and maybe, just maybe, he was in love with her. He could be. Now that she was gone and he had what he wanted, he missed the little surprises she gave to him. He missed her smile and the warmth of her body when she hugged him from behind in the kitchen while he was working on the dishes. With Susan, all he felt was lust. He had thought Faustina was boring and old-fashioned, but now that she was gone, a huge part of his happiness was gone too. Susan didn't make him feel alive like Faustina did. Susan didn't make him feel wanted or loved. She was just a piece he thought he needed, but she was redundant. He sighed at the thought of her and wished he could turn back time. He wished he had taken her side in his house, and he had begged her to stay. He wished he had been calm and not pushed her so hard that Susan thought she was going to attack. He broke her, and in the process, he broke himself too. But Faustina was in the past now. He has everything he wants, and his life will take a new turn in the coming week when he finally becomes the managing director of Alonso Tech. A great milestone he has always prayed to climb. Since he was married to Susan, there was no need to hide their relationship anymore, which made it boring. They started to realize that the fun was all about Faustina. It was all about wanting something from her, deceiving her till they got what they wanted, and now that they have it, they don't really want each other anymore. They barely spoke to each other. Apart from their sex sessions, everything made them look like strangers, especially when they both killed the one person who trusted them both. Very quickly, the day he had been waiting for came. A bright Sunday morning. He was dressed in a well-tailored emerald green suit with a rose pattern. They say it brought out the strength in his body. He looked like a real CEO, and he was ready for his new position. Susan was happy for him. It was a win for the both of them. The CEO was going to be the one to sign him into his new position, and it's going to be a very big event. Very important people were invited to the event, and most of them were people he might never be able to meet again, but most importantly, his role was so vital. For the first time in his history of working in the company, he was going to meet the CEO himself. Close to no one has ever seen him around the company. He runs it from the outside. He doesn't know why he had to marry before he became the MD, but somehow, he felt like he also used Susan to achieve this goal. It could have been possible with Faustina too. He shrugged off the thought of Faustina and headed to the company. He attended the event with his wife beside him. It was a corporate breakfast with wealthy people all over the world. He also didn't know why the CEO had made it a great gathering just to make him the MD of the company. The program started, and finally, the CEO arrived. Everywhere was silent, and everyone was also eager to see him. The silence was loud till they heard the sound of shoes, probably heels clicking the tiles. A woman. Everyone gasped when she showed herself. Let us all welcome the CEO of Alonso Tech herself, the great mind behind all that we own in this company. Her body, the dress, the shoe, the bag, the shades and the hair, everything was giving elegance, screaming wealth and money. He never expected a woman to give him the role of MD in her own company. Everyone clapped, and the media did their thing with the photos while he stood there with Susan, waiting to be called upon. Something about her smile felt familiar. He was called to stand beside the CEO, then he felt it. The strange aura he always felt at night when he thought about Faustina, the faint scent of her perfume that still lingered in his room. The slight feeling that she got was in his room, but this time, standing next to this beautiful and shaped lady. He couldn't help but feel. How do you feel now that you have what you want? James, she whispered, her voice calling out goosebumps from his body. He could crawl into the earth's crust. He could never mistake that voice anywhere. Fear gripped him as he trembled and felt hot. He almost peed his pants. What? You weren't this numb when you pushed me to my death and left me to die. He couldn't take it anymore. He yelled and took 2 steps away from her. He got unbalanced and fell off the stage. Everyone gasped. The CEO took off her glasses. His fear was permanently confirmed now. She really was Faustin, and the young lady holding her bag was Stella, who was looking down at him with disdain. His expression was nothing compared to that of Susan, who wished she could just faint from this nightmare. She has been the one who actually killed Faustina, but could she still be alive? You died. I saw you die, James muttered and crawled back. Beads of sweat broke from his face. Faustina smirked and took slow steps down the stage. It must have been fun for you both. Uncle, I told you he was nothing more than a rag like the rest of them. Liam is the current managing director of Faustina's company, and he has been managing it since her parents died. She has been doing all the work from home because she didn't want to assume a position without a husband. It's been a hassle. She really loved James, and she thought he had the same love for her. She has insisted she wanted to marry him right away, but they have insisted she put him to a test. Stella, however, snitched on Faustina when Faustina told her everything about her hunch that James was cheating on her. But you died. Faustina is dead. Who are you? Susan yelled. It quickly became a drama, just as Faustina had planned it to be. She watched the two of them and thought about how they would spend the rest of their lives regretting their actions. They had killed her so easily, but she was going to make them beg for death, and they would never find it till they grow old. Faustina hadn't planned it this way. The test was simple. She was going to find another woman to seduce him, and if he fell for it, she was going to dump him and find a better husband. She had already found the lady she was going to send to him, but that was all before she found out he had been smashing her best friend. You may want to know how I came back to life from the dead. The darkness you both sent me to. Everyone in the hall gasped. Phone cameras pointed in their direction. It was easy to make my uncle ask you to get married before you can be the MD of my company, and I was hoping you would come to me with a ring. She sighed and drank a little water. I died, in fact. Well, almost. Thanks for calling Stella and asking her to come pick me up. If she had been any later than that, I would have died. Little sis knew how to play along. You saw me at my burial, and you were probably wondering what happened. You saw me in my coffin, pale as the night without breathing. I'm sure you came to make sure I was fully dead before you went back to your wedding. You had the guts to get married while I was being buried and making up a fake will letter that you had forged with my handwriting. How evil could you get? All because you wanted a piece of land. That's the smallest piece of land I own, and I could give 100 if it out to homeless people and still not feel anything leave my net worth. Tears stung her eyes, but she would never cry for a man again, never again. Susan finally collapsed and fainted. She smirked and then called security. James was numb and dumbfounded. She had been in a coma when she died, and when she woke up, she remembered everything that happened like it happened the day before. She has made up her mind on what to do. Security took her away. She knew she was going to deal with them later. For now, she has called this gathering for two things. One is done. She apologized for the drama. I was hoping to give a little entrance drama, she said with a laugh, and everyone laughed with her. She continued the breakfast gathering and announced her coming back into the company as the CEO. She has decided she is not going to get married, not even to the security man who is giving a Christian Herper vibe from the Twisted Lies novel. After declaring her intentions for her company and her workers, she gained over 10 more investors that morning and other people who wanted her for a partnership. Modeling companies called on her for contracts, and in a matter of hours, she was the top trending woman in the whole world on social media. She was standing strong again, and her heart would never be broken as it has already been. She didn't know what the security did to them, but all she knew was that she just didn't want to see their faces. She was smiling on the outside, but there was chaos living inside her as she met with different investors. Theoretically, she, in one way or the other, owned everything James owned. They did the paperwork, and the land was gotten back from him and a whole lot of stuff he had taken from the company. All his salaries had come from her, and she had been the source of his living for the past 2 years. They were both charged in court for attempted murder, and they were found guilty. Faustina made sure she pressed enough charges on them both. Susan secured 50 years imprisonment with 20 years of community service, while James got just 30 years of jail time. It is going to be enough time for Faustina to never see their faces and move on from the dreadful mess she went through just because she was in love with someone. Faustina almost felt sorry for them as they were taken away from court. Susan was crying, screaming, and begging Faustina to help her. She didn't know what to do or say. Her ex-best friend was going to spend almost the rest of her life in jail. Eventually, Faustina went back into business. She became an inspiration for younger women out there after they heard her story. Her strive for excellence was the only thing she had, and she knew for a fact that she might never trust any other man again. Love is a cruel punishment, and she never wants to see it again. If love is the only way for her to get out of trouble, she would rather dig her own grave and sleep in it. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another gripping episode from Timeless Audio Novel Stories.